welcome to Bold and Blunt, and I am your host, Cheryl Johnson, a Christian conservative in today's news, politics, culture, and events. And today's show topic, social media bias, and what states are doing to fight back. There may be some real solutions coming to this anti-conservative, anti-Christian, anti-Trump supporters bias that we've seen for so many months now, even longer, from those leftists that lead up the social media platforms in this country. But first, heads up, Washington Times has an offer right now, 50% off the digital platform of the Washington Times, particularly for Bold and Blunt listeners. Go to washingtontimes.com/Cheryl. Type in your info and you will have a year's access to the Washington Times digital platform for 50% off. Also, while you're at it, go to washingtontimes.com, find my name, click on it, Cheryl K. Chumley, click on it, scroll down to the bottom, and there will be easy peasy directions, easy peasy links to sign up for my 3 times a week newsletters that come out right before lunchtime with all my commentaries, as well as my twice weekly podcast, Bold and Blunt. It's all in the newsletter. You'll get it delivered right to your email box. Would love to have you as a subscriber, because we need more Americans armed with the bullet points and the lines of logic that are needed to fight the lying left, right? It can't hurt. It can only help. Love to have you in the fight. So, speaking of fight,
Down in front, please.
this is Governor Ron DeSantis seated.
Why can't I please?
Get the pens ready.
Getting pens ready to sign.
I do think, so today is the 23rd or 4th?
24th of May. He's signing away. What's he signing? He's signing Florida's latest pushback against these social media companies that want to, oh so boldly, in your face, censor conservatives. Censor is probably not the right word. Legally speaking, right? Social media companies are privately owned. So the First Amendment technically does not apply to them. The First Amendment applies to government. Congress shall make no law respecting yada, yada, yada. You know the rest, right? Congress. So when a social media company comes along, like a newspaper, like say, the Washington Times, right, comes along and wants to print or post or publish what its editorial staff want printed or posted or published, who has the right to put a stop to that, right? That would be like the Washington Times being told by Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer that the Washington Times must publish 5 times a week their opinions in its pages, and to boot, throw in a little Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on the digital platform 5 times a week. That would be akin to that. Private companies shouldn't be dictated to by the government, by anyone in government, over what can be printed or published or posted. But
they subjectively manipulate their algorithms. In doing that, what they do is to disadvantage conservative thought and to be lenient upon left-leaning thought. That has borne its way out. You don't hear about groups from the left being censored. You look at what is happening on YouTube and it's like the Wild West. You can put up anything, say anything, and it is there, except when it comes to conservatives and conservative filmmakers, conservative entertainers, people in Christian music have had their movie trailers, their videos, their songs removed from some of these platforms.
that's Senator Marsha Blackburn speaking with Cheddar News about the bias that's inherent, seemingly so, with social media. And as she's pointed out, there are plenty of conservatives and Christians out there who have used social media, tried to monetize their postings on social media, have successfully monetized their videos and so forth, only to see YouTube, only to see these social media, these tech giants suddenly swoop in overnight, seemingly without reason, without cause, and yank their access, yank their posts, put a complete shutdown on their ability to make money. And all that, wow, they're taking the Section 230 privileged exemptions from Congress. Here's Blackburn again.
You have the Federalist that they're saying, well, published content, you can put some of that up, but we're going to remove all the comments. Well, if they want to say they're the public square where people have free speech and public debate, you can't do that.
See the difference? It's one or the other. You can't say that you're a public platform where anyone and everyone can come and debate and exchange ideas freely, and at the same time decide who gets to exchange ideas freely versus who does not. There's a case to be made that that's a clear violation of Section 230 exemptions. Here's Blackburn once again. She's great at this.
So this is why it's time for Congress to step in and to look at Section 230, look at needed reforms. I've discussed this with the President. We are working on legislation that would address reforms, that would put a threshold in place. Users that are 50 million and less, you would have Section 230 protections. The bigger users, you would not have those safe harbors. Going in and looking at the definitions in 230 are overly broad. Things that are abusive or unlawful, we need to be more specific in those definitions. We need to also say political speech is free speech.
Political speech is free speech. What a concept, right? I wonder who would approve of that. Maybe the founding fathers who had that in mind when they penned the First Amendment? Possibly. Anyhow, that was Senator Blackburn, obviously, when President Trump was still in office. But look, the issues haven't changed. The debate hasn't changed. The arguments haven't changed. The lines of logic haven't changed. What has changed is the censorship has actually grown worse since, of course, Donald Trump booted permanently from social media platforms. Why? Because the leftists in charge deemed him too dangerous, his speech too dangerous for the average citizen. It's crazy. It's crazy when a politician in office has to prove that their speech meets the safety standards deemed by the leftists leading up the censorship charge. And yes, I know censorship is the wrong word, okay? Got that. Anyhow, Governor Ron DeSantis, Republican, Florida, headed right for the White House in the coming years, no doubt. He is fighting back.
DeSantis signs big tech bill with new speech rules for Twitter, Facebook. Governor Ron DeSantis, a Republican who is positioning himself for re-election next year, signed legislation on Monday at Florida International University in Miami that aims to crack down on social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Amazon out of concern that they are conspiring against conservatives and their free speech. The legislation, which DeSantis touted as the first of its kind in the nation, would, among other things, make it illegal for large technology companies to remove candidates for office from their platforms in the run-up to an election. It would also make it easier for Florida's Attorney General and individuals to sue big tech. These platforms have become our public square, DeSantis said at a lectern with a sign that reads "Stop Big Tech Censorship," noting that big tech oligarchs have censored debates about the pandemic and policies that officials put in place to contain the deadly virus, such as lockdowns. Silicon Valley is acting as a council of censors. They cancel people when mobs come after somebody. They will pull them down, he said.
All right, it goes on a little bit more. That is the Miami Herald video and story, miamiherald.com. You can hear the whole video. Anyhow, what do you think of this? What do you think of Governor DeSantis signing into law a bill that prohibits social media companies in the state of Florida from booting conservatives, basically. That's what it comes down to. Because as Senator Blackburn said, it's not the liberals who are getting booted. It's not even half the time the terrorists, for crying out loud. It's not even the radicals. I mean, how many times do you hear CNN reporting about Black Lives Matter removed from Twitter, Black Lives Matter and Antifa permanently banned from YouTube? You just don't hear headlines like that. So, what do you think about this? What do you think about this law? Already, the media is springing into hyperdrive to lay the groundwork for Governor DeSantis to be laughed out of court. As a matter of fact, this was Wired's recent headline. Florida's new social media law will be laughed out of court. And attorneys are making the rounds already, staking out their legal claims against this bill, of course, against Governor Ron DeSantis. Because if this is successful, think how this will spread to other states. Texas, as a matter of fact, Governor Greg Abbott, back in March, was facing off fights in the media. Headlines like this from lawandcrime.com. Governor Abbott, we're talking about, from Texas. Governor says new bill will make it illegal for social media companies to censor Texans. Lawyers call it an unconstitutional clown show. That was the story from lawandcrime.com back in March. So, if Governor DeSantis is successful in keeping this bill out of the court or winning in the court, well, look out, social media companies, because you can pretty much see where this is headed. Any state headed by Republicans will quickly adapt and adopt similar measures. And with the election coming, that's going to make it awfully hard for the left to stifle conservative viewpoints, to shut down conservative speech. That's going to make it a little bit more difficult for Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg to shut up all the nasty conservatives out there, the hateful, intolerant, misogynist, racist conservatives. You know the deal. If you're a conservative, and you probably are if you're listening to this, you've been called those names before. So, again, what do you think of this? I got to say, I'm a little bit torn on this. I don't like government telling me what to do. I don't like government telling me I can say this or can't say that. When I say I'm just speaking as an American citizen, putting myself in the shoes of social media companies. But I don't think government should be in the business of telling either private businesses or news/blogs/social media companies that are privately owned what they can post and publish and what they can't post and publish. And yet, there is that little Section 230 exemption. So I understand the logic behind it. And I got to say, social media companies did this to themselves. They brought this on themselves. You know, how many times have we seen Jack Dorsey and Zuckerberg and, all the faces on Capitol Hill of these big tech giants sitting there and listening to Republicans chastise and scold and hammer away at them, and watching their faces as they answer and address questions by not answering or really addressing questions, and then just leaving Capitol Hill and going back to business as normal, going back and booting off conservatives, booting off Project Veritas, James O'Keefe and Pamela Geller and, Donald Trump, the President of the United States. So how many times have we seen that? They brought this on themselves. And did they really think that America the free, Americans, even some in the Democrat Party still believe in freedom, Americans who by and large love their freedom of speech and their freedom to exchange ideas viciously at times. That's our choice, right? Did they really think that forever and ever that they could continue to control social media this way? Well, I think their downfall really was the whole Parler thing, because people like me who have been hesitant to call for government to clamp down on the privately owned social media companies. People like me have been calling on conservatives for some time to bring up some competing avenues, to develop competition to these social media giants. And look what Parler did, right? Parler, which I think initially was supposed to have been called Parlay, but nobody got it. And so it just kind of shrugged its shoulders and said, okay, we're Parler. At least I think so. But anyhow, look what happened to Parler. So I think a lot of people like me, that's kind of where we started thinking, you know what? These social media companies are just, they're radical tyrants. And certainly the Section 230 exemptions ought to be stripped, or as Senator Marsha Blackburn said, at least narrowed and better defined. But Florida Governor Ron DeSantis isn't waiting on Congress to act, and thank goodness, because we've been waiting on Congress to act for a very long time. And the clues why Congress hasn't acted can be found in the Follow the Money trail, because they're all up there taking donations from either directly these companies or the lobbies for these companies or the friends and employees of these companies. We all know it. Cat's out of the bag on that. So even Republicans that you think should stand strong on the side of freedom of speech and crack down on these social media companies aren't. Maybe they put on a good show, during the Capitol Hill hearings to their constituents, but really when it comes down to it, they're not doing much. So it's good. We have some action on this. And my guest today actually has a little bit more insight into this. Her name is Samantha Fillmore. She is a state government's relation expert with the Heartland Institute, which is located, the headquarters of Heartland is in Arlington Heights, Illinois. And Samantha testified in Florida on this very bill. So who better to ask, who better to know than Samantha? Thank you so much for being here on Bold and Blunt. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, so you testified on this bill in Florida. Could you start by telling what's in this bill and actually, maybe even more importantly, what's not?
Yes. So this is Florida's Senate Bill 7072, sponsored by Senator Rodriguez. And I did testify in the Florida Appropriations Committee in early April, or late April, actually. Sorry, all the months we've been doing so much testifying around the country, they kind of blend a little bit.
Yeah, I bet.
So we have seen 70 pieces of legislation similar to this in upwards of 30 states, all attempting to challenge big tech in some way.
Wow.
So they all manifest, yes. We've had our hands full, but I've loved every minute of it. But the legislation manifests in a myriad of different ways, depending on the state and obviously what is best suited for the composition of the legislature and the constituents. This Florida bill is a bit extensive. So the general big tech legislation that we've seen rings in around 4 to 5 pages. This one is 27, maybe 28 pages. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely extensive. It covers so many topics that we could talk about it for hours. But at the core of it, the intention of this legislation is to provide Floridians some cause of action for when they feel like they have been censored or deplatformed based on political or religious speech. This legislation does not intend to go against anything in federal statute, and it actually fits very nicely into the exemptions clause for federal Section 230.
Okay.
So, sorry. I know I just gave you a lot of information.
No, there's a lot of questions I want to follow up on things you said. So 70 pieces of legislation in 30 states. I did not know that. So how, I guess how positive is Heartland, are you guys, that all these pieces of legislation in some form will ultimately pass?
So that is always tricky. And this is such a very controversial topic that, to be very candid, working with legislators, when there are big topics like this, you primarily spend all of your time working out the kinks during like your interim phase when legislatures aren't in session.
Mm-hmm.
But this was, as we all know, kind of everything came to a head with social media censorship around the turn of the new year. And so there was no intention by any lawmakers that I know to work on this prior to January. And then January, it just dropped like a bomb, and everyone decided this was something they wanted to do very quickly. So no, it actually, and as I'm sure you know, there are so many steps in which legislation can be caught up in the process, and it can get snagged. So in many states, this legislation it will not make its way to be a law this year. It's been introduced. There are some kinks that need to be worked out, and I think that's good. That's okay. I'm never in a hurry to rush a law through. I think that sometimes taking the time to perfect the definitions and perfect the language is important. So it has died in a lot of states, but we are now currently working to gear up for next session and to make sure this is good language and good legislation.
Okay. So Florida's has passed, though, and it's signed into law. And this
Yes.
this is why I'm so excited to have you, someone from Heartland, on, because Heartland is a libertarian-leaning think tank. And
Yes, ma'am.
one of the issues I personally have always had with the calls for government to get involved in cracking down and regulating the social media companies is that these social media companies are privately owned. So I hate the idea of government regulating.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there are people at Heartland who probably see similarly to at least a certain extent. So justify to me and to others who think that way why this bill in Florida is in line with American free market principles.
Absolutely. I love this question. So I will try to do this without going into too much detail
Detail's
about
fine.
all of the federal statutes, or I could. So there is in Section 230 almost a liabilities gift for these big tech platforms. So they, on one hand, are claiming to be a third-party entity, almost like a bulletin board, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not a speaker themselves. They are not a personal speaker or publication like the Washington Post or the New York Times. So in that, they have this little liabilities gift in Section 230 where they are allowed currently, or they've been getting away with, censoring and deplatforming without any cause, without allowing any of the users of the platform to question it.
Right.
So it has been a liabilities gift. And what I believe and what all of the sponsors of the legislation and what I would pose to you and submit to you is that the monopoly, if you will, and we can go into whether you believe it's a monopoly or not, on public speech on social media is not the product of a healthy free market, but rather the product of a skewed market because these corporations have a liabilities gift and a liabilities loophole. So this is not the healthiest free market. It's a skewed market because of this legal loophole. So this legislation is in fact correcting the corruption in the market for when you tie in constitutionality with private organizations.
Okay. And, I think a lot of people maybe were reluctant to make the case or to agree with a case such as you just made until Parler came along, right? Until Parler did what the free market is supposed to allow to occur, and they got shot down for it. So it cast the social platform leftists in a really negative light.
Absolutely. And I want, and I make a very big point to make this very clear, there is nothing wrong with Facebook or Twitter or any organization, maybe one that doesn't even exist yet, removing, censoring, editing, and having a viewpoint that they just generally believe fits their demographic and fits what they are in line with. I completely support a private entity's ability to do that, so it's Heartland. However, they should forfeit their liabilities gift. Then they should be treated like publishers. Because on one hand, they're claiming that they aren't speakers, and then they go and by censoring and deplatforming and removing, they're entering into an editorial context, and thus I think they should lose their liabilities gift. And that's pretty much what this legislation does. We're not going to force Facebook or Twitter to do anything that they don't want to do, but they can't keep getting away with this. You can't claim that you are not an editor and then edit and not allow any of your users a cause of action to question why. So that's why this legislation is very important, and that is the argument for why this is not really regulatory to change the market, but correcting, honestly, a misuse of federal statutes.
So, if these social media leftists actually explained to people why they were being platformed, would there still be an issue? Would there still be a violation with the Section 230?
So, no. And that is part of what this legislation that we've been working on across the country entails. And again, depending on which piece of legislation you're looking at, but allowing these corporations and these companies to reach out and explain why, which I think is important because perhaps it's right. I'm all about teachable moments.
It's a courtesy too.
Right. But I have heard I've heard from leaders of like nonprofits to reverends to people who have businesses just waking up one day and their page is gone.
Yes.
And that's a marketing tool, and that is a source of income for a lot of people. And they get no rhyme or reason or explanation, and there's not even an appeals process.
Right.
You can't appeal, and so that is what this is for. And I am all for teachable moments. So perhaps there are, and there certainly are people who maybe say something uninformed that ended up being removed, or something that could be deemed hateful, lewd, lascivious, harmful in nature. All the legal terms that we throw around with this. Why not make it a teachable moment? Why I believe in people's ability to learn and to be better, and I think that's part of what's so wrong with the American culture right now is you just shut it down, and there's no dialogue, and there's no conversation. So let's talk about random citizen in the middle of America in the flyover states. Let's talk about what you said. Maybe you can learn. Maybe we can all evolve through this. And just censoring and deleting and silencing. Well, we're never going to grow that way. We're never going to learn as a society. So yeah, so that's my personal little belief, my little spiel.
Well, I think that's in line with how most moderate Americans think. It's one thing to have this platform and start booting people off, but then to boot people off and just turn, deaf ears to their pleas for explanations and clarifications.
Absolutely.
It's the ultimate in arrogance. I can't think of any other reason that the social media giants do this aside from just pure arrogance.
Absolutely. It's a disconnect. It is a disconnect. And that's what is so challenging with an issue like this, is we're dealing with tech giants in Silicon Valley, and we're so out of touch with your average American. And again, the solution to free speech is never less speech. It is always more.
There you go.
Which is always my qualm with censorship. So yes, and again, this as a free market. From a free market perspective, if Facebook came out tomorrow and said, we're only going to do X, Y, and Z, these are the only things we will allow, these are the only things we want, that is completely fine. Allow an appeals process. Be honest about it. And that's what's frustrating with big tech, is they claim to be non-biased, free, open, fair for everyone. And that is just simply on its face untrue.
Yeah.
So at this point, is it deceptive trade practices? So we can get into a bunch of
wow, thinking like a lawyer there. That's really good. Well, I know our time's growing tight, but let me ask you this one final question, Samantha. So, I was looking at the headlines that the mainstream news is reporting about Governor DeSantis's signing of this bill into law, and they all seem to think that this law is going to be laughed out of court. What do you respond to that?
absolutely, there will be lawsuits filed.
Mm-hmm.
This is important, and I think the lawsuits actually need to happen. This is a conversation. This is how we start to challenge and understand how we can tackle big tech and how we fix this issue of censorship and political free speech on social media platforms. Because to fix censorship, one of four things needs to happen. There are four possible solutions, and three of them are just unfeasible. One is that they just stop censoring, which will never happen.
Right.
Two is that we repeal Section 230, which is bad. Section 230 exists for a reason. It is good federal statute. The third would be an executive order from a president, but generally we should stay away from those as a society.
Right.
And then the fourth is under Section 230, it is subsection 3, subparagraph E, and that is a state-level exemption written into the federal statute that allows for state legislation to slide into it, and that's what this does. So this is, opponents of this legislation on its face call it unconstitutional. However, there is literally a statute for state-based laws that are pursuant to Section 230. So there is legal standing for this legislation, and it will be it's almost begging, that exemption is almost begging for states to pass legislation like this so we can get this question going. And Supreme Court justices have sounded off on it, and I think that it will be litigated, and it is a question of whether or not do these platforms have First Amendment rights, or should they be treated like a public commodity? But also, are we prioritizing the First Amendment rights of the company versus the First Amendment rights of people? Where are we falling on this? So actually, a lawsuit is a good, and we knew this was going to happen, but a lawsuit is how you begin to toe the line and thread the needle and ask the questions, and really figure out where we stand and how we are going to move with big tech forward into the future and how we're going to handle this.
Right, because it'll shape how other states pursue this very same issue. So honestly, what a great win for Heartland, because I can't think of a better governor than Ron DeSantis to bring this to the point where it will go to court. So
absolutely,
that's awesome. Samantha, thank you so much for your time, for your last minute time. I appreciate the accommodation. So
of course,
great work. I was going to say you guys do at Heartland.
Well, thank you. I'm very happy. I've been nerding out about this since January, so I'm always very happy to talk about it. So thank you for having me. I really enjoyed speaking with you today.
Well,
Hopefully everyone learned something.
Yeah, thanks for nerding out on Bold and Blunt with me. So you have a great day.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Samantha Fillmore, the Heartland Institute. If you haven't checked out the Heartland Institute, you have to. Go to heartland.org. They always cover great stuff like this, and they always take a freedom-minded stance. It's so refreshing, so very needed. And actually, this is going to be an issue that is going to heat up this year, next year, probably until it's resolved. So, thanks for listening. Appreciate your time. Tune in next week. And meanwhile,